The first truck arrived just after sunrise. By lunchtime, a second one rumbled through the old wooden gate. Before the week was over, more than 20 loads of fresh wood chips had been dumped onto Margaret Ellis's struggling farm. The piles grew so high they could be seen from the county highway, towering over the weathered red barn her late husband had built with his own hands 40 years earlier. Drivers slowed to stare. Neighbors shook their heads. Some laughed openly. They all believed the same thing: the lonely widow had finally lost her mind. But while everyone else saw a mountain of worthless waste, Margaret quietly saw the first piece of a future no one else could imagine. Just 6 months earlier, life had looked very different. Margaret and her husband, Daniel, had spent decades growing vegetables, hay, and small grain crops on their family farm in rural Oregon. The work had never made them wealthy, but it had paid the bills and given them something they treasured even more than money: a life built with honesty and purpose. Then Daniel suffered a sudden heart attack during harvest season. Along with unbearable grief came hospital bills, loan payments, rising property taxes, and equipment repairs she could no longer afford. Every letter arriving in the mailbox seemed to carry another warning. Unless something changed soon, the bank would begin foreclosure proceedings before winter. One afternoon, the owner of the nearby sawmill knocked on her door with an unusual proposal. His company was spending thousands of dollars every week hauling away leftover wood chips produced during lumber processing. Disposal costs kept rising, and finding new dumping sites had become increasingly difficult. If Margaret allowed the trucks to unload the material on one unused corner of her property, the company would pay her a modest monthly fee. It was far from enough to save the farm, but it would help cover groceries and electricity. After one quiet evening of thinking alone at her kitchen table, she accepted the offer. The reaction from the town came almost immediately. Every new truckload became another reason for gossip. At the local diner, people joked that Margaret had turned her farm into the county landfill. Some wondered if grief had clouded her judgment. Others claimed she was so desperate for money that she would agree to anything. Even her grown son, Ryan, drove out one weekend and pleaded with her to cancel the agreement before the property became impossible to sell. Margaret listened without interrupting. When he finished speaking, she simply smiled, thanked him for caring, and changed the subject. What nobody noticed was what happened after sunset. Every evening, once the dishes were washed and the farmhouse grew quiet, Margaret opened a stack of borrowed library books and filled page after page with handwritten notes. She studied soil biology, composting methods, biomass energy, moisture retention, erosion control, and sustainable farming practices. She watched university lectures on an aging laptop that often froze in the middle of videos. Sometimes she stayed awake until 2 in the morning comparing research papers with old agricultural journals Daniel had collected years earlier. The growing piles outside no longer looked like waste to her. They looked like raw material waiting for the right idea. Still, Margaret refused to rush. Instead of spreading the wood chips across every field, she marked dozens of small test plots behind an abandoned equipment shed where curious neighbors couldn't easily see. She mixed different amounts of wood chips into the soil, carefully recorded rainfall, temperature, and crop growth, and photographed each section every week. Some experiments failed completely. Several plants barely sprouted. Others grew normally. But a handful of test plots began showing results she had never seen before. Margaret said nothing. She locked her notebooks in a kitchen drawer, smiled politely whenever another truck arrived, and let the town keep believing she had made the biggest mistake of her life. Because sometimes the greatest opportunities begin the very moment everyone else stops believing in you. Spring arrived, and Margaret finally trusted the evidence she had collected for nearly a year. The test plots enriched with carefully aged wood chips produced healthier soil, stronger vegetables, and significantly higher yields than any field she had ever farmed before. But instead of expanding her crops alone, she noticed something even more valuable. Landscapers, gardeners, vineyards, and orchard owners were paying premium prices for high-quality compost and mulch. The mountains everyone laughed at were not just improving her farm, they were the raw materials for an entirely new business. Without attracting attention, Margaret bought a used wood screener, repaired an old tractor, and converted an abandoned storage shed into a simple processing area. Every dollar she earned went back into the business. She worked before sunrise, farmed during the day, and bagged compost late into the evening. At first, sales were slow. A few local gardeners became repeat customers because the products consistently outperformed cheaper alternatives. Word spread quietly from one satisfied customer to another. The sawmill owner barely noticed. He believed Margaret remained dependent on the small monthly dumping payment and proudly renewed their agreement for 5 more years at nearly the same rate. He considered it another successful business decision. Margaret signed the papers without negotiation. She understood something he did not. The contract guaranteed her a continuous supply of the one resource every future competitor would eventually need. Within another year, demand exploded. Independent landscaping companies stopped buying mulch from the sawmill's retail division and began purchasing Margaret's products instead. Garden centers praised the quality. Farmers discovered healthier soil and lower irrigation costs. For the first time in years, Margaret paid every outstanding bill on time. She even repaired the farmhouse roof Daniel had always planned to replace. Then everything nearly collapsed. One cold autumn morning, Margaret found hundreds of compost bags ripped open across her yard. Fuel had been poured into her processing equipment, destroying several machines beyond repair. Tire tracks disappeared into the darkness beyond the gate. Whoever had done it wanted more than property damage. They wanted her business to fail. Many expected Margaret to accuse the sawmill publicly. She refused. Instead, she installed security cameras, strengthened her storage buildings, and quietly borrowed enough money to continue operating. Her determination impressed loyal customers, who volunteered equipment and labor until production recovered. The attack that was supposed to destroy her business only strengthened the community surrounding it. Months later, an announcement changed everything. The Oregon Forestry Agency invited suppliers to bid on a massive wildfire prevention project requiring environmentally friendly mulch for thousands of acres of public land. Large corporations submitted polished proposals backed by experienced legal teams. Margaret almost decided not to apply. At the last moment, encouraged by a retired forestry officer who had seen her products perform exceptionally well, she mailed her application. Weeks later, the phone rang. Against every expectation, Margaret had won. Truck after truck that once arrived carrying waste now left carrying finished products worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. The same highway where drivers once slowed to laugh became a steady route of delivery vehicles carrying her company's name across the state. Newspapers celebrated the remarkable transformation of a struggling widow who had built a thriving business from discarded material. Success brought unexpected consequences. A county investigation into industrial waste practices uncovered financial records showing the sawmill had been overcharging disposal clients for years while quietly passing unnecessary costs throughout the local market. Margaret had never reported them. Her success simply encouraged officials to examine why a small farm could process wood chips more efficiently than the region's largest mill. Customers left the company voluntarily, realizing they finally had a fair and innovative alternative. Months later, the exhausted sawmill owner arrived alone at Margaret's farmhouse. Pride had disappeared from his face. "I underestimated you," he admitted softly. "If this mill closes, hundreds of families will lose their jobs. Buy it before that happens." Everyone expected Margaret to refuse. Instead, she agreed under 3 conditions. Every employee would keep their position. Executive bonuses would end until every debt was paid. And not another truckload of usable wood chips would ever be wasted again. The agreement transformed the failing mill into the heart of a regional recycling partnership connecting farmers, landscapers, and local businesses. Waste became opportunity. Competitors became partners. Families kept their livelihoods. Years later, visitors no longer remembered the towering piles of wood chips that once made Margaret the target of endless jokes. They remembered the woman who looked at a problem everyone wanted to throw away and quietly built a better future from it. Margaret never proved people wrong by arguing with them. She proved them wrong by seeing value where everyone else saw nothing at all. Sometimes the greatest success begins with the courage to believe in an opportunity long before anyone else can see it.